The water utility is one of the very few companies that have survived revolutions and wars. It has been operating for over 100 years.
Why was a supervisory board established specifically in Mykolaiv?
The municipal sector must reduce its vulnerability to political influence.
What was the reaction within the community?
We stepped into rather turbulent waters, or like whitewater rafting.
It is certainly interesting. It is definitely a challenge.
Mayors can benefit from the establishment of supervisory boards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Board of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel. Today we are joined by Hannah Montavon, Chair of the Supervisory Board of the Municipal enterprise Mykolaivvodokanal. Hannah is also a co-founder of Mykolaiv Water Hub. Joining us as well is Sergiy, co-founder of the law firm Arzinger and a member of the Supervisory Board of Mykolaivvodokanal. We are also joined today by Roman Kozyuk, a member and chair of Supervisory Boards of Ukrainian companies and the author of the book The Ultimate Beneficiary. Roman is currently working on a new book, which we are co-authoring together. Therefore, in today's episode, Roman and I will be serving as co-hosts. Colleagues, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Today we will discuss issues related to supervisory boards in municipal enterprises. In fact, there are not many such enterprises in Ukraine that have implemented supervisory boards. Mykolaivvodokanal is one of those municipal enterprises. Hannah, Sergiy, of course, the supervisory board of such an enterprise differs significantly from other supervisory boards. Why did you decide to join this supervisory board?
For me, first and foremost, it was a professional challenge, as I have been working in this sector for 14 years in the field where I currently work. I began working in 2012 at the German Development Bank and primarily operated in Eastern Europe, Southern Africa, the Caucasus and the Balkans. I also gained experience working with water utilities in Ukraine. When the full-scale war began, I saw the situation the utility found itself in. Mykolaivvodokanal is located just 70 kilometers from the front line, facing targeted destruction of infrastructure, while at the same time bearing responsibility for 500,000 residents. I realized that these challenges were extraordinary compared to those faced by other water utilities around the world. Therefore, when the opportunity arose to contribute my experience and energy to this enterprise, I decided I was ready to do so.
For me, the fact that this was Mykolaiv itself also made it a challenge, especially considering the ongoing issues there, including the destruction of water infrastructure at the beginning of the war. For me, it happened somewhat unexpectedly, although I had previously served on supervisory boards and have long been interested in this area. Initially, I did not submit my CV, as my background is entirely in the humanities, and I wondered what connection I had to a water utility. But later I decided to apply, realizing that there was indeed a meaningful role for me to play in addressing risks, working with donors and related matters. The main motivation was the challenge itself. It is interesting, and we are fully committed to the work.
Hannah, Sergiy, there are approximately 14,000 municipal enterprises in Ukraine. Their combined revenue amounts to hundreds of billions, yet the majority operate at a loss. In your view, to what extent can a supervisory board, as both an advisory and supervisory body, influence the process, not necessarily in terms of eliminating losses on a mass scale, but in terms of improving the P&L performance of a water utility in particular?
To answer this question, we need to look at the broader context of the past 30 years, or even better, the past 100 years of municipal enterprise operations. Interestingly, if we look at water utilities at the time of their establishment, they were founded with private capital. They were private companies operating in each city. Water utilities are among the very few companies that have survived revolutions and wars. They have existed for over a century and will continue to exist long after us. However, this changed with the introduction of the planned economy and the corresponding management model during the Soviet Union. This was followed by 30 years of stagnation, speaking specifically about water utilities, during which they did not develop progressively. Everything was operating in survival mode. Water utilities were deprived of access to professional expertise. The sector effectively operated in isolation. I see real potential in the introduction of supervisory boards to quickly open the tap, so to speak, to the expertise that has long been lacking, expertise that unfortunately cannot realistically be brought in on a full-time 5-days-a-week basis. With the supervisory board in place, Mykolaivvodokanal immediately gained 5 experts, each in their respective field. This provides institutional stability and depoliticization, enabling the enterprise to plan its development systematically and shield itself from political turbulence.
Let me briefly add, not specifically mostly about water utilities, which of course need development. But when I looked into why we have 14,000 municipal enterprises while Lithuania or Latvia have around 100, and similar figures apply in other countries, it is because roughly half of our enterprises should either be privatized or liquidated. In some cases, the only person benefiting is the director, who drives a Mercedes while the enterprise itself operates at a loss. The number is simply too high in my view. That said, I am not referring here to water utilities or other critical infrastructure.
Those enterprises that have been destroyed, since the full-scale invasion, there have likely been quite a number of such municipal enterprises. Why was a supervisory board established specifically in Mykolaiv?
I know this was the position of the mayor, which I support. The rationale is that the municipal sector must reduce its vulnerability to political will. A mayor may change positions or make decision to leave office altogether. In Mykolaiv, approximately 70 municipal enterprises are currently under the mayor's oversight. The existence of supervisory boards allows him to delegate part of that responsibility to us. At the same time, it creates an opportunity to stabilize the enterprise. We have therefore took on this responsibility and are working to ensure its stability.
In the context of our discussion about my book, The Ultimate Beneficiary, I would like to ask you, who is the ultimate beneficiary of this supervisory board? We agreed that the ultimate beneficiary is the mayor, as the representative of the community. So my question is, what was the reaction within the community, among the city council members and the mayor himself, to the establishment, appointment, and work of the supervisory board?
I would describe the reaction at this stage as cautiously positive. We already have concrete results. The City Council voted to establish the Supervisory Board and approved our remuneration. There is a formal resolution and an approved regulation governing the Supervisory Board. We also held a meeting with council members who serve as our link to the community. They provided feedback on the concerns of Mykolaiv residents, which is highly valuable for us. Overall, the situation is stable and we continue to maintain active communication. I believe one of the defining features of supervisory boards in municipal enterprises is the number of political stakeholders whose interests and influence we must constantly monitor. This includes the city council and the mayor, but at times also political stakeholders at the national level, all of whom remain on our radar.
So, broadly speaking, would you say that stakeholder reaction lies somewhere between skepticism and overly high expectations?
I would not say expectations are excessively high. Rather, there is a certain need for awareness and education about what supervisory boards actually are. Initially, there was an expectation that we would intervene in day-to-day operations. That is not our mandate. This requires explanation and clarification, but overall the situation is quite normal.
How was the supervisory board established in practice? Assembling the right composition of the board, preparing the necessary documents and regulations. All of this requires specific expertise. It also requires time, and presumably someone had to lead and manage the process.
Yes, of course. First and foremost, without genuine willingness, and we have constructive relations with the mayor, and I would say with the council members as well, the board simply would not have been established. CGPA assisted us in selecting and shaping the composition of the board. In my view, the result is a very strong one. We have two specialists with deep technical expertise. Hannah also has a legal education, OLM background, which is extremely important. In addition, we have two bankers who have solid financial expertise, understand reporting, and bring substantial professional experience. For example, Andriy Haidutsky previously chaired the Supervisory Board of the Ukrainian Seaports Authority, and I contribute as a lawyer, so overall I believe the composition is well balanced. On a personal level, the team dynamic also works very well. We operate as one team, and I cannot recall a single instance where we had a serious conflict. We always managed to find constructive solutions.
CGPA selected part of the board's composition, correct?
That's right.
Not everyone.
Not all members, as two were representatives of the owner, Hanna and Björn.
Formally, we have two foreign members, myself, a citizen of Germany, and Björn Kar Jensen. He is a citizen of the Kingdom of Denmark, more precisely, a Danish citizen. He is an engineer and microbiologist with strong technical expertise and extensive international experience. It is particularly important that he is from Denmark, as Denmark plays a critical role in the reconstruction of Mykolaiv and is a significant donor. Therefore, Björn views the work of the Supervisory Board and the enterprise not only from an engineering perspective, but also through the lens of Denmark's involvement.
Another question. When you joined, what were your initial impressions? Based on your intuition or the issues you identified, how did you shape the agenda and what were the first decisions of the Supervisory Board?
Our first decision was to appoint an acting director. We entered rather turbulent waters, like whitewater rafting over rocks, because the director fell ill in August and unfortunately passed away in October. We therefore had to appoint an acting director. That was our first decision. Immediately afterward, we established board committees. We began by requesting information from the enterprise to understand the state of its reporting and, more broadly, how it was functioning. At the same time, we immediately started working on KPIs. We understood that a new director would be appointed, and it was essential to define the framework within which he would operate. We also began preparing to announce an open competition for the new director, engaging a recruiter with the support of the European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative. I believe this was, and remains, a unique case in Ukraine, where a supervisory board appointed the director of a municipal enterprise.
There were many candidates.
19? Yes, 19 in total. As chair of the committee, I can say we did not know how many applications to expect. There were different assumptions. Ultimately, we received 19 applications, shortlisted 6 candidates, and appointed one of them.
How did the process unfold from the initial announcement of the competition through the committee review and ultimately to the Supervisory Board's decision? For example, did you interview all 6 shortlisted candidates? Please describe the director selection process in more detail.
First, a recruiter was hired, and together we approved the selection criteria. There was a lengthy discussion about whether we needed an operational manager or a transformational leader. We opted for a balanced profile, given the specific nature of the enterprise, which clearly requires transformation. The criteria were formally approved and drafted in 2 languages as we anticipated potential interest from international candidates. The competition terms, announcement, and evaluation criteria were approved by the nomination committee, then were approved by the Supervisory Board. On November 10-12, the final approvals were granted and the competition was published on the Vodokanal website. The recruiters then disseminated the announcement through their professional networks. The application deadline was set for December 2nd. We conducted the competition very promptly, as leaving such an enterprise without a director for an extended period would have posed significant risks. By mid-December, we had already formed a shortlist. The recruiter selected 6 candidates. We conducted interviews with all 6. From that group, we narrowed the field down to 3. The interview process also included a presentation titled The First 100 Days at the Water Utility. In my view, discussing the future is valuable in assessing a candidate's strategic thinking. However, I also paid close attention to past experience, how the individual had navigated previous transformation processes and responded to changes in both professional and personal contexts. Ultimately, we identified 3 finalists. We kept all 3 candidates in the process almost until the very end, partly because they were undergoing review by the anti-corruption compliance officer. We also wanted to mitigate risk. In case one candidate was disqualified, we would have a strong alternative. On January 28th, we signed a contract with the final top-ranked candidate.
Sergiy, in the context of appointing the director, if I am not mistaken, you serve as chair of the nomination committee, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
How many committees operate within the board and what are they?
This is perhaps more a question for the chair. We have a strategy committee, an audit committee, and an investment committee.
More precisely, strategy and investment, audit and community engagement.
And of course, the nomination committee. 4 in total.
4 committees.
Yes, 4 committees.
Understood.
The strategy committee is responsible for the enterprise's strategy. Now that a CEO is in place, he will likely become actively involved in shaping and implementing the strategy.
Yes, and for this purpose, we are also conducting a community survey. We plan to launch it at the end of February or in early March. I believe it is critically important to listen to the community, understand their pain points, and identify their priorities. We have also started donor mapping. This involves identifying which donors are currently active in Mykolaiv or have interest in supporting the city. We assess what resources we may be able to mobilize. These resources will support the implementation of our strategy.
Naturally, water utility in another region is unlikely to be a competitor to Mykolaivvodokanal. What unites such enterprises is that they provide a socially significant service to the population, much like other municipal enterprises. This, of course, introduces significant specificity to both the enterprise's operations and the work of the Supervisory Board. The primary focus is not business performance or P&L alone, but also the delivery of a socially essential service. This includes sensitive social considerations related to tariffs and affordability. How does this function at the level of the Supervisory Board?
I recently listened to your podcast featuring members of Supervisory Boards from a private company. I mentioned this to you during our phone conversation. After listening, I came to the conclusion that we are heavyweights of corporate governance. Our enterprise cannot independently define its target audience, choose its customers, set its prices, or test new products. Instead, we have a regulator that mandates, for example, an effective 70% discount on our services. Our tariff currently covers only 30% of the cost of water production and water supply services. We accept this reality because water utilities, and incidentally, during the candidate selection process, we asked one fundamental yet complex question. What is the purpose of a water utility?
To provide water supply services.
That is an interesting answer, but it is incomplete. If we look deeper, a water utility supplies water, and many people expect it to be drinking water. We consume approximately 3 liters of drinking water per day. Meanwhile, the utility supplies around 120 liters per person daily and forms part of critical infrastructure. There is a fundamental principle we adhere to. You cannot supply water without understanding how you will subsequently remove it. Of those 120 liters, roughly 117 are used for washing, sanitation, cleaning the home, and doing laundry. In other words, this is primarily about hygiene and ultimately about public health. In the Western world, it is well understood that water utilities serve as guardians of public health. We ensure a healthy population. Therefore, our core mission is the well-being and health of the community. The service must be provided to everyone regardless of income, age, or any other factor. This underpins the very foundation of the enterprise's operations.
That is a very compelling perspective. Thank you. In essence, this defines the company's mission. It is not merely about supplying water, but about enabling public health, hygiene, and overall well-being.
And comfort, yes. This must be reflected in how we keep the service accessible while maintaining the enterprise's financial sustainability. We need to strike a balance, ensuring residents can afford and use the service, while managing the enterprise in a way that preserves its financial stability. Because infrastructure can be exhausted, and once it fails, the service will cease. Our responsibility is to find and maintain that balance.
The operations of municipal enterprises in Ukraine are very often loss-making, as we have already discussed. There are objective reasons for this, given the social significance of the service. Water supply is a socially essential service and must be provided regardless of an individual's income level, especially since it is directly linked to public health, which makes its importance even greater. Are such services loss-making worldwide?
The challenge we have outlined with water utilities is indeed a global one. Most water utilities around the world face similar pressures. The core question is how to remain affordable while preserving financial and operational sustainability. I have found it useful to examine different tariff policies internationally, as I believe there is room for improvement in the Ukrainian model. For example, Tunisia applies a different approach. Their tariffs are set according to household income. In other words, the higher the household income, the higher the water tariff. Personally, I view this as a form of penalizing prosperity, since the physical need for water is essentially the same for everyone. Why then should higher-earning families pay more for the same essential need? There is another approach used by many utilities in the United States and Canada, which I find more compelling. This is a 4-tier tariff structure. 4 pricing levels are established based on consumption volume. The first tier covers a basic quantity of water, typically measured in gallons. This initial volume is priced below cost to ensure that a person can meet basic survival needs. That is, they can always drink water and prepare food. The second tier is also priced below full cost, covering additional essential household uses. The third tier covers a higher volume, for example, water used for bathing, and is priced at cost. The fourth tier applies to high consumption levels. If someone prefers to take 2 baths a day, that volume would be priced above cost. There is also the concept of an excessive use charge. For example, in a desert-like scenario, when there is a lawn being overwatered or an uncovered swimming pool. In other words, when a consumer does not consider how they are using this resource, they pay an additional fee. Mykolaiv has a partnership with a US utility, specifically the Las Vegas water utility. When they implemented this tiered tariff system, their revenue increased significantly. Some customers initially said, yeah, we don't care about our usage, we'll continue as we wish. Yet the utility still fulfilled its social function. Everyone had access to water, and at the same time, there was no talk of running a loss.
If we look at our own paradigm, what methods or approaches are most commonly used in Ukraine to bring a utility closer to break even? For water utilities in Ukraine,
Given the current situation, where tariffs cover only 30% of costs, I don't see a way to achieve full break-even without raising tariffs. The gap is simply too large to cover otherwise. This is even more challenging during wartime. Utilities near the front lines, for example, face the loss of corporate clients and general economic instability. However, there are opportunities to explore ways to reduce costs and increase revenue. First, one of the largest expense items is electricity. Reducing consumption is essential, for example, by using biogas or solar panels. Second, we need to explore potential new sources of revenue, which services remain unregulated. The Mykolaivvodokanal could potentially provide. This should also form part of the strategy to analyze where we have potential sources of commercial services. I strongly believe that Mykolaivvodokanal should finally fully embrace the role implied in its very name, that of an enterprise. In order to preserve its core function in serving the population, we need to consider where we can act entrepreneurially.
In other words, cost management, efficiency, and the search for additional sources of independent financing.
Of course, we need to conduct proper valuation and assessment. But for example, the wastewater treatment facilities could be viewed not merely as a collection point where everything from across the city flows, as we all know, but rather as a plant that actually produces valuable materials. This requires proper evaluation, but conceptually, these facilities can be seen not just as endpoints, but as production sites generating valuable resources. At this stage, this may sound somewhat theoretical. However, water utilities around the world are actively exploring how to extract phosphorus from wastewater. It is present there, it is valuable, and global reserves will only decline over time. This is something we should seriously consider.
Now let us give you a brief pause and turn to our legal expert. Mr. Sergiy, what legal pitfalls or nuances arise in the work of a supervisory board of a municipal enterprise? What unique legal challenges stem from the fact that the owner is a specific entity, the local community represented by the mayor, in the case of the water utility?
As I mentioned earlier, the activities of supervisory boards of municipal enterprises in Ukraine are not yet comprehensively regulated. There are draft laws currently under consideration, so for now we largely operate by analogy. And this is both an advantage and a disadvantage. As a lawyer, I would probably view it more as an advantage because if something is neither regulated nor prohibited, the space for action is somewhat broader. At present, there is no specific legislation dedicated to supervisory boards of municipal enterprises. I believe it will be introduced soon. Certain inconveniences, for example, the requirement to submit asset declarations, are likely to be clarified or adjusted by these draft laws. It is not particularly burdensome, but it does require additional time. And if you incorrectly declare something, even unintentionally, this may already trigger certain liability, and this accordingly reduces the number of candidates willing to apply to supervisory boards of other municipal enterprises. We understand that we are among the first. Lviv was first, we are next, and others will follow. It may not become widespread immediately, but at the very least it will become more structured and regulated, similar to what we see in state-owned enterprises and so on.
That said, referring to Ms. Hannah's remarks about vertical integration and additional business lines, I believe this is a highly interesting concept that could prove both relevant and beneficial for other regions of Ukraine and for other water utilities as well. Therefore, I can reasonably assume that water utilities in other regions will be among the next municipal enterprises to establish supervisory boards.
Mykolaiv is currently in the process of establishing supervisory boards for Mykolaiv Obltepleenergo and Mykolaiv Elektrotrans. For them, the process should be easier. We have already gone through this ourselves. We adopted the relevant resolution and regulations and even refined them slightly. There are expected to be 2 more supervisory boards established. I am genuinely proud to observe what is happening in Mykolaiv because such initiative by the mayor in establishing supervisory boards truly deserves recognition.
Anna, Sergiy, my book, which I hope you will find time to read, The Ultimate Beneficiary, is very much rooted in corporate governance. I essentially grew up professionally within corporate governance at the School of Corporate Governance, starting from the adoption of the law on joint stock companies, and I served for many years as a corporate secretary. For me, this is extremely important, and I strongly insist on it. And I know that if the work of the board is properly organized, then the efficiency of decision-making and the implementation of those decisions will also be at a high level. Therefore, my question is, what mechanisms, or perhaps which individuals, ensure discipline in the preparation of materials, the review of agenda items, and the monitoring of implementation of decisions? I personally view the decision of a collective body, the supervisory board, as a product that has its own production cycle. So how is this organized in your case? How is this discipline maintained, and through what mechanisms?
I believe this discipline is still being formed in our case. As I mentioned earlier, we entered into a rather challenging period. We signed our contracts on September 18th. On the 25th, we elected the chair. Immediately thereafter, we had the appointment of an acting CEO, preparations for the CEO competition, and the preparation of the financial plan. We also found ourselves at the final stage of the planning. Looking back now, I realize that it was an extremely intense period. And you constantly remember that your contract states 4 working days per month, just 4 working days. The gap between that and reality was substantial.
The overrun was significant.
Yes, expectations versus reality. We were asked what our expectations were and what the reality turned out to be. The reality was quite something. At this stage, I find it interesting to observe the group dynamics. I can see that certain individuals are stepping forward, taking initiative, carrying issues forward, and guiding them through the committees. One positive where reality actually exceeded expectations is that we discovered highly proactive, intelligent, and genuinely engaged people within the enterprise. They are also contributing, for example, to the development of an employee survey. And currently, we are working on designing a community survey as well. For me, the next 3 to 4 months will be particularly important. We now finally have a CEO in place, and we will be able to observe how these intermediary processes begin to take on a more structured and formalized shape. The role of the corporate secretary is absolutely critical.
Do you have one?
Yes, we do. We appointed him immediately. He is also a lawyer at the enterprise. That brings certain advantages, so he understands the specific regulatory framework of this sector, which is heavily regulated. And yes, Vitaly performs his role with distinction.
We also have an additional workload in that all our documents and minutes are bilingual. All members speak English, but one member, Björn, does not speak Ukrainian, so we have to translate everything. Naturally, some minutes are not intended to become public until a certain point. In such cases, we sometimes prepare them ourselves without involving the corporate secretary and only release them later.
So you apply a confidential or for official use only classification? For official use only, yes.
Only for a certain period, nothing extraordinary.
Simply temporary confidentiality rather than a formal restricted classification?
For example, during the CEO selection process, since the corporate secretary is an employee of the enterprise, several sets of minutes were kept separately and prepared directly by the board.
As for setting the agenda, this depends heavily on the chair of the supervisory board, on their priorities and their view of the proper sequencing of key issues that need to be addressed. As a rule, the board seeks to maintain a balance between operational matters, current reporting and related issues, matters of systematization, where certain processes need to be introduced or further structured within the company, and matters relating to strategy and future development. How does this work for you?
This balance is now beginning to take shape for us as well. The initial priority was to launch the board's work and appoint the CEO. That was priority number 1. At the beginning of this year, we finally approved our annual work plan. We are also in the process of approving our rules of procedure. In other words, we are still working in parallel on our own internal governance documents. Only after that will we move further into the next phase. At this stage, a key priority is the proper onboarding of the CEO, integrating him into our processes. In line with his KPIs, it would be important to jointly establish a robust management reporting framework. At present, such reporting does not exist at the enterprise in the form it should, and then I hope we will reach a more stable operating rhythm. For now, much of it remains situational.
Though the issue of systematization clearly falls within the broader effort to formalize and structure governance processes.
You have touched on an important topic that has always been of interest to me, namely the development of management reporting. It is absent in required format, and for each enterprise, it naturally has its own specific dimensions and features. When I chaired supervisory boards on behalf of the State Property Fund, financial plans were mandatory and they were very closely aligned with management reporting. For example, I am currently a member of the Supervisory Board of a dual-use technologies cluster. It is a public organization. There are specific nuances there. A municipal enterprise has its own. By the way, in the cluster, we are currently developing a management reporting framework. In your view, what should be the first 3, 4, or 5 key components of management reporting specifically for a water utility?
I will share my perspective, however, I am interested in hearing yours.
There is no dogma here, of course.
I would be happy to continue this discussion later in more detail, because my approach would be to start from the KPIs, from the objectives we have defined for the CEO. In fact, we were unable to define some of them precisely because reporting was entirely absent. The CEO has been tasked with establishing proper reporting within 3 months.
That in itself can be considered one of the KPIs.
It is included among his contractual obligations. The KPIs are formally defined, but we were unable to determine the baseline values. Therefore, his task is to identify these baseline figures so that, within 3 months, we can jointly determine the target KPI levels through year end. At present, we have defined 5 KPIs and still need to add 3 more. This, incidentally, reflects the overall state of reporting at the enterprise. In some areas, there is simply no reliable data to anchor further analysis. Our plan is to start with the CEO's KPIs and then cascade them down to departments, identifying for each unit the indicators that are critically important to us. Each indicator should have a clear target to be achieved by year end.
Hanna, when you accepted the proposal to join the Supervisory Board of Mykolaivvodokanal, you must have had certain expectations. I assume some of them were met, while others perhaps were not. Could you please share your reflections on that? And specifically, would you recommend that other potential board members consider supervisory boards of municipal enterprises as attractive and worthwhile opportunities?
I would definitely recommend it. It is interesting and it is a challenge. For us, I would say that financial motivation was certainly not the primary driver. The remuneration is not particularly high, but the challenge lies in contributing to the city and more broadly to the municipal sector. In addition, it is invaluable experience. I know that many graduates of institutions such as INSEAD or corporate governance programs often join advisory boards, sometimes even without compensation, because experience must be gained somewhere, and that matters. All members of our board had prior governance governance experience, but none of us had previously worked with municipal enterprises. I would therefore recommend embracing this challenge. It involves a tremendous amount of work and requires a deep dive into the specifics. If we succeed, and I believe we will, then we will be able to demonstrate that it works.
What motivates me personally is the social significance of a municipal enterprise and the proximity to the people for whom you work. You walk outside and understand you are working for each of them to ensure their comfort and basic quality of life. So if, for potential supervisory board members, the social dimension is important, then working with municipal enterprises is an ideal opportunity.
A brief remark. I must admit, I was genuinely inspired by what you said, that when you step outside in Mykolaiv, you realize that as a supervisory board member, you are working for every single resident, ensuring access to hygiene and the ability to meet their essential needs, their basic needs. We have discussed whether the right to water is explicitly enshrined in the Constitution, and yet, without electricity or heating, humanity once managed to live in primitive conditions. But without water, it simply can't. This is indeed a profoundly deep level of social responsibility, the mission you carry. I agree with you. This sense of mission is one of the foundational building blocks for a potential supervisory board member.
Yes, I would even go further. In these years, working with water utilities is especially compelling because what we might call the third era of water is beginning. This is not rhetoric, it is truly happening. The first era of water was when humanity lived alongside water, in a largely parallel and natural coexistence. We settled near water, we used it, but we did not seek to alter it. Then came the second era of water, when we began redirecting rivers, building dams and grand infrastructure projects. We did not take water into account, we managed the element as we saw fit. Now the third era is beginning. Increasingly, water itself is becoming a stakeholder with its own interests. Those interests are beginning to be taken into account. Water sources matter. Water utilities, and we have just discussed this in the Ukrainian context, should be viewed as guardians of public health. In Western countries, however, an additional perspective is becoming dominant. They are among the first responders to climate change and key protectors of the environment. There is a growing understanding that nature itself is a subject. This marks the transition to the third era of water, and we are seeing the rise of numerous decentralized technologies. We no longer extract water solely from rivers, we can generate it from air. Decentralized energy and water supply systems are emerging. It is truly fascinating. To be working at such enterprises at precisely this moment, I can hardly imagine a more inspiring professional role.
From a corporate governance perspective, water becomes a stakeholder and can become a beneficiary.
Indeed, these are relatively new ideas in the development of the water sector, but they are gaining increasing traction. I personally subscribe to this view. The interests of water as a resource must be considered.
That is a powerful concept.
And it is genuinely encouraging to see that individuals with this mindset are joining supervisory boards and are motivated by the very mission of the enterprise. It is truly rewarding to witness how, drawing on the experience of Mykolaiv, could the implementation of corporate governance and supervisory boards be expanded to other municipal enterprises across Ukraine?
At this stage, we have 4 months of practical experience. We are continuing to move forward. But I can already say that mayors stand to benefit from establishing supervisory boards, provided they are genuinely prepared to delegate responsibility rather than creating purely decorative boards. Why? Given the shortage of qualified professionals currently on the Ukrainian labor market, and this shortage will only increase. I can explain this from my own experience. I wanted to work at Mykolaivvodokanal, but I am not prepared to relocate to Mykolaiv and completely change my life. At the same time, the establishment of the supervisory board gave me the opportunity to contribute my expertise in a format that is comfortable and efficient for me. In this way, each enterprise can, in essence, gain access to at least 5 board members who are ready to contribute their time, energy, and knowledge. Moreover, the CEO selection process has now been completed. CEO was selected through a fully transparent procedure, with the involvement of a professional recruiter and the supervisory board. We will now continue working together with him on the KPIs we aim to achieve. For mayors, this strengthens the stability of their municipal sector. I have also been observing the experience of Berlin. At Berliner Wasserbetriebe, the supervisory board consists of 17 members. Throughout my adult life since the age of 18, no municipal enterprise in Berlin has been directly linked to the city's political fluctuations. Because the municipal sector ensures the city's vital functioning, politics is politics. And I believe this is precisely the path Ukrainian cities must follow in order to reduce political influence over the municipal sector.
Mykolaivvodokanal is probably one of the few Ukrainian enterprises where the chair of the supervisory board is a woman. Ms. Hannah, it would be very interesting to hear about your approach to gender equality and diversity, including gender diversity.
I believe that diversity in decision-making processes allows for more balanced and well-considered outcomes. Let me give one example of why this matters. In Berlin, there is a district rebuilt in the 1950s, Hanseviertel, which is now under UNESCO Cultural Heritage Protection. This dates back to the 1950s. The architects were all men. And Berlin in the 1950s, just 5 years after the war, where 80% of apartments had internal stairs, and most buildings had no elevators. You understand that the male architects at the time simply did not take into account that there might be baby strollers. This is a clear example of how critically important it is to consider different perspectives when making decisions. Ultimately, the entire system benefits when we incorporate the views of different genders as well as different professions and areas of expertise. Diversity strengthens the quality of decisions taken. When decisions are made collectively,
I would like to add, we are not merely not against women, we are strongly in favor. Secondly, when it came to electing the chair, Hannah was the only one who prepared and delivered a presentation. We began the meeting and asked whether anyone wished to nominate themselves. Hannah said, "I do." We responded that we supported her. First, she is from Mykolaiv. Second, she brings dual expertise, both legal and technical. And third, she is an exceptionally proactive person.
You did not stand much chance.
We essentially told her, "We will support you. Go ahead and lead."
there was a continuation to that story. I said that I wanted the role, and they said they supported me. And I thought, where is the battle? I had prepared thoroughly, I had my arguments ready, but it is important to acknowledge the role of the men as well. This truly matters. I was nominated by the mayor, who is a man, and I work alongside men who sincerely support and promote gender equality in practice. I was also invited to this talk by men. That support greatly strengthens the work overall. I want to thank the men who contribute to empowering women to do the most meaningful work.
Thank you. Ms. Hannah, Mr. Sergiy, would you mind if Roman and I used part of this conversation in the book we are currently preparing, a book on corporate governance?
Yes, of course. I agree.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you very much for this conversation and for the very interesting insights and for helping to approve such an important direction for the further development of corporate governance in Ukraine's municipal enterprises. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. See you in new episodes.